no, I think we're doing it.
Well, I thought it's just a Zoom call, John. What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Steve, hold on. Oh no, here we go. I'm taking the link, I'm copying it, I'm sharing it. Boom. Or if you want to, go to my YouTube, Steve.
All right.
And my goodness, what are we doing to ourselves? Yes. And here you go, Steve. There you go. You should have it. Yeah. So I'm going to keep checking. I have my phone here. Things are live. I love it. All right. So I think we're good. I think we're good. I think we should
carry on.
Okay. Welcome. This is the Chaffee Brothers present an Advent series in D minor. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you need to know my brother came up with the title for this, right?
Kind of. We had a title. We had an idea for something like this a decade ago, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like the idea of the title has been bouncing around. This sort of silly thing where we add some extra bits that don't make any sense.
Right.
Well, yeah. So what's the plan for tonight? What are we doing, John?
Okay. Well, here's the thought.
Okay.
Every single Christmas season, there are each Sunday 4 different things, 4 different topics, themes, ideas that are brought up on each recurring Sunday leading up to Christmas Day.
Right.
Right. They usually go in the order of hope, peace, love, and then joy. So over the next 4 Sundays, we're going to have a Zoom call transatlantic because I am just west of Philly. Steve is overseas in Edinburgh in Scotland. And so via use of the internet, we're going to make something good because honestly, we're in COVID times too, over there as well as here. And so we needed to come up with something for the people that we know. And it just seemed to pair up easily with this idea that we've always had. What do you want to say, Steve?
Yeah, well, and we've had how many different groups of folk? Because we've been, well, times at Halawasa, the summer camp where we worked, so that we know folk from there. We know some folk currently in France. We know some folk in California. We know some folk where else? What's the list?
We know folk in North Carolina. We know people from circles in South Jersey, in Delanco, people maybe back at LBI. We know people, my goodness.
Well, and oftentimes they've said that when we get together and attempt something like banter, chuckles occur.
So sometimes people think that Steve and I are twins, but I don't think that we actually look super alike, right?
No, it's more mannerisms.
Mannerisms are pretty similar. All right. Now, unfortunately, I'm the better looking one and the smarter one. You're not allowed to be both, but God blessed me with more favoritism, I guess you could say.
He's also the more humble one.
I'm the best at being humble.
Oh,
There we go.
gosh.
You set that up. All right. But we have a few different areas of people. And what we've done is we've taken this, and I've already posted it over to my Facebook. There might be some people watching it on YouTube already. And so if you have comments, we're going to talk about hope tonight. And then towards the end, if there's any comments, we'll talk about that. But before we get into anything, I think you've got an ugly sweater on.
I have a fantastic sweater on. Thank you very much. Because, well, it's not technically the Christmas season. It is the Advent season, but I still thought I would wear my ugly Christmas jumper, which is appropriately themed given what I enjoy. And I am shocked, I say, that you don't have an ugly Christmas jumper. Oh, sorry, on that. Wait, because we did say transatlantic. Or any Americans listening, I'm going to say things that are in a Scottish idiom. And for any Scots folk listening, I'm going to say American things. And I have forgotten how to code switch anymore. So I don't really remember what's what. I'm sorry. Context clues will be your guide. You can always ask me later if you'd like.
Yeah. So although you have some British isms that you've incorporated, I have still maintained the level of South Jerseyness. Just to let you know, I did go looking for a Christmas sweater. I went to Target, but every single ugly Christmas sweater was like 30, 35 bucks up. And I wasn't willing to do that. I've said to myself, I'm sure I can find an uglier and cheaper sweater than 35 bucks for an ugly Santa sweater.
You have 6 days.
You mean until the next one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, but to make up for it, though, I decided I would bring up my nativity set. So as we're talking through hope, peace, love, and joy, we can reference a nativity. Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. We should probably say where we both are and work. So yeah, indeed, I currently live in Edinburgh, Scotland, which is the capital of Scotland. And I work at a church in one of the neighborhoods around here called Greenbank Parish Church as their youth worker. So I do a whole number of different sorts of things, from helping out with a babies and toddler group to meeting with teens, to a couple of Zoom calls that we have as frequently as we can, to regular help during services, preparing a video that has something like a kid's address every week, and doing things like a digital borrowing box, which is sort of like a take-home pack that parents can use to talk about the Old Testament reading with a couple of craft ideas and activities for their kids. In addition to, I'm not sure what else, but quite a fair bit. What sorts of things do you do at your church, John?
So I am the youth director, and throughout COVID, we've been bouncing back and forth between doing Zoom meetings throughout the week, obviously, but then this fall things lightened up for a bit. And so we were going back and forth middle school and high school weeks. And then we were kind of trying to lean in towards more small groups, and then our numbers in COVID started going up again.
Yeah.
But in the midst of that, I'm also doing, well, I guess I used to do a lot of retreats. I used to love doing 5 to 7 retreats a year. And I've been doing a Hebrews class. It's been fun. We're going to wrap up next week online. But then there's good chances that I will be teaching at Eastern University in the spring. So that's good.
Right.
So I have a lot of things that are happening, but it's all good. But by and large, I get to be a nerd and be a scholar about the things that interest me, and I try to invite people into that same level of wonder and nerdness about Christianity. Yeah. I don't know how you describe it. I'm actually just really interested in human growth and everything. So it's all good. So are we ready? You want to chat? What are we doing next?
We're going to talk about hope, right? Is that the plan? Hope and bits of the Gospel of Matthew? Is that what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to do, like I said, hope, then peace, love, and joy, right? But tonight's going to be hope. And sometimes it's good to think about hope in reference towards its opposite. So there's hope over here, and over here is this opposite, which is despair. And so tonight we're going to riff about how the Christmas story, or the nativity story that we all know, bounces back and forth between these themes of hope and despair. Yeah.
Right, my dig.
Okay.
I think it's probably helpful if we try and do a little bit of self-limiting, because there's quite a lot of interesting things that occur when we see the differences between the Matthean story and the Lucan story, because
Right.
there are some genuine ones, and trying to suss out why they include some details and not other ones, I find endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. Which let's say most people know that the stories of Jesus are wrapped up in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are 4 ancient texts, but only 2 of them, Matthew and Luke, talk about the Christmas story that we all know at this time of the year. Mark and John don't have stories of Jesus's infancy or being born in Bethlehem. So we're really going to be bouncing back and forth between Matthew and Luke the most. Yeah. So, Steve, what do you know when you talk to people at your church? How do you summarize some of the main bullet points of Matthew?
Matthew is going out of his way again and again to show Jesus as a literary type of Moses. So he ends up doing quite a lot of things that happened in the story of Moses, often in the order that they happened to Moses.
Yeah, he's kind of seen like a bigger, better Moses in some ways. Yeah, I agree. Anything else?
Well, you see, even as early as the genealogy, where like part of the reason that Jesus's family flees where they were is because of an attempted genocide, just like what occurs in the early parts of Moses' story.
Right, where Pharaoh tries to kill all of the baby Israelites by telling them to throw them into the Nile River. And then Matthew does something similar where Herod tries to kill all the infants in Nazareth because there's the rumor of an upcoming king. Yeah.
A rumor which he gets originally from who? Wise men. Lovely. Do you have any thoughts and feelings about the wise men? Because I have a couple, but I'd be interested in some of yours.
So, as far as I understand, and maybe you could fill us in, Matthew talks about 3 wise men coming and visiting Jesus, but it actually doesn't say the number 3, if I'm right. And actually, the word wise man really doesn't mean like a teacher, it means an astrologer. And so these were people that were reading the stars, which was actually a pagan thing to do, right? These were not Jewish folk that were reading the scriptures and learned about this new king that was going to be born. These were pagans reading astrology who deduced this information.
So these are, or maybe a slightly kinder way to put that is that these are people on the out group of Judaism, like sort of the furthest edge out from sort of what respectable Judaism would have been at the time. All the same, we'd also still get some material of shepherds being visited, who, as far as like the stories in the Old Testament are concerned, are like as innermost core an example of like what and who Israelites were as almost anything else. They were itinerant, they lived in hills. So much of the metaphors and poetry used throughout the Old Testament refers back to shepherdhood and just everything within that remit. So there's this very interesting moment going on where you see 2 different poles of like something about the arrival of Jesus, the birth of Jesus, extends out to the farthermost edges beyond Judaism, but also quite deep to the coremost metaphors and imagery that they use to identify themselves.
Oh, yeah. So
I'm just...
No, that's great. So the Christmas story is kick-started by astrologers and shepherds
Yeah.
who were religious fringe people and society fringe people. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I dig. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Mm.
I think I heard Matthew also tries to make Jesus look like Moses in that he gives 5 big talks, which is similar to the story of Moses, but then also 5 is the number of Torah, like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into it then. What are the broad strokes that most people have about the Christmas story? And then how does hope fit into it? Let's chat.
Broad strokes. Something about a donkey and the inn being full and a new star in the sky.
Yeah.
Appearance to the shepherds.
Angels appear to the shepherds. Yeah, tell them where to go.
A little bit of travel about where they were. Again, that differs between Matthew and Luke, where they sort of transit to and from. And virgin birth, probably, are the big ones.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the big ones.
Okay.
Is there anything I'm missing? I think that's right. Yeah.
No, that's pretty good. And then the angels come and they sing peace on earth and goodwill towards men. Right? Okay. So let's do this then. Let's see if we can define hope, and then let's define despair. And then let's see about the Christmas story in the middle of all of that.
Okay.
So for me, as I think about hope, it's future oriented, right? It's not past oriented, it's future oriented. Hope has to do with maybe perspective. Maybe it means you've got a hint of what you think might be coming up, and you know that the hint tells you that the future is generally going to be good. Yeah. I would say that's generally hope. So then the opposite, I would think despair is you've got a hint or an idea within you that says the future is going to be bad. And so at your starting point, it could go one of 2 ways. You either have a hopeful mindset that things are now, the tide has turned and things are going to keep getting better, or the tide has turned and things are now going to keep getting worse. So I see hope and despair as 2 opposites on the same line. That's me. How would you define it?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier with some of our sort of middle schoolers, effectively. And we had quite an interesting chat where we made a sort of slight line of distinction between optimism and hope, where you could sort of say that almost like optimism is kind of an attitude, whereas hope, I think, needs to be, I think it's something a little stronger than future oriented, because I think hope kind of needs to be more specific. At least certainly if we're trying to think along like sort of Christian lines, I think, there's something about hope being not only future oriented, but sort of towards a specific kind of future, a specific way of it. Because otherwise, if it's just sort of more general, that seems to be more in the way of optimism, which can just sort of say that generally things are going to be good, but it won't necessarily have a specific point in mind, specific reference. Whereas so much of the Christian story, even the Gospels, right? All of the Gospels are conditioned by the resurrection account. So like everything comes back to it. So it's sometimes a bit of the, like for the virgin birth, there are some authors and writers and scholars who wonder whether or not the way the doctrine of the virgin birth developed came out of the resurrection. It wasn't the virgin birth sort of signposting the resurrection first.
Right.
That sounds maybe a little convoluted. But there's some evidence to suggest that, which I find really compelling and interesting, because on a sort of, you might say, naive read, if you're just sort of approaching the text as it is, the first thing you're going to read about, if you're reading Matthew, is a virgin birth. So and that's going to be for an ancient audience, and particularly Matthew's audience. That's going to be that's already priming them for what he's trying to say, namely sort of strange birth circumstances which is also part of the genealogy in Matthew, which lists a couple of other strange and odd ones. So there's like some very clever rhetoric that's occurring all the way through.
Let's maybe talk about that. You said you made some notes about the genealogy of Jesus there in Matthew, right? I made some. I noticed some things as well.
Okay.
You might notice that the genealogy in Matthew it rises. It goes from Abraham to David, where things get better. From David to Methuselah, it goes down. And then from Methuselah, it gets better on the way back up to Jesus.
Okay.
There's also something to be noticed because the down point is when they get kicked into exile. And so here in Jesus' own life or his genealogy, you're hearing the story of Israel, even in the midst of those names. Now, some people like to talk about how the Bible's got a hidden code in it, or there's numbers or numerology. I think it's sometimes true, but not always.
Sure.
And I like how Matthew says that there's 3 sets of 14, and how that's probably a reference towards 3 is the divine number. And then I've heard some people write about how 14 is the royal number.
Yeah.
So in the genealogy, some people have questioned if it's already inferring a divine king.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. But I also think, so we're sort of hedging around the territory of gematria, right? This idea that like there are very specific, very specific meaning for numbers that show up, right? So that there's a lot of kinds of code woven into the text, which I can sympathize with, but I wonder if it's better or more helpful to think about them more as like tropes that are being used. Like these are literary tropes that for their audience would have been reasonably well known, but weren't necessarily like hard and fast rules. They were just like homages and references that would give people an inkling or a hint. Which again, we can see it in like, the number 3, the number 14, the number 5, the number 40, 7, 10. So I'm always a little cautious, good, I think, Presbyterian that I am, reformed and always reforming, right? That there are these things that, we hold to, and I think quite seriously, but that's not without gripping them so hard that you can't necessarily loosen your thought on them, because and we've talked about this before, we quite enjoy the notion of like play when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, I enjoy playfulness about doing God talk. Yeah.
Yeah. And partly that's a consequence because we have seen lots of different ways of groups being Christian.
Yes.
Like we've like a fair bit of different, broadly Protestant, but still there's quite a large range of what kinds of Protestants there are and how they act out being Protestant, how they enact being Protestant.
So I remember you and I were having a conversation about how you're taking a class on Eastern Orthodoxy, which is like the third branch of Christianity. It's not as popular in America. We usually have Protestant or Catholic, right? But that Eastern Orthodox, for them, Jesus coming wasn't a Band-Aid to fix a problem. Jesus coming and God being incarnate, the Christmas story, was the plan all along.
Oh, okay, right. We want to go there. Okay.
The incarnation, God was always going to come and be born. It's as a result of us making some mistakes that he's also got the added mission. And I always thought that's really fun to think about how it was always God's joyful plan to be made man and to dwell among us. Yeah.
And again, I think that's part of the consequence of having taken some of these classes and chatted with lots of folks that, there are so many interesting ways that can be worked. I'm like, there's plenty we can dredge up if we're going to talk about the opening chapters of Genesis. Maybe not for tonight, though. That will take quite a lot of things we can chat about because there is so much there that It is a text not only in the way it was originally written, but also in the way it's been received and re-received. That just makes it an incredibly, incredibly dense text in the same way that Matthew can be, because we approach, we approach any text we read with some of the other text we have read in the background.
Right. So everything we've ever read influences what we're currently reading now.
Yeah. There's always a part of that does something to us. Yeah.
So Steve and I both had the good fortune of having parents that were both educators, right? But on top of that, our mom was a literary professor. And so as a result of it, we've always had a unique approach, I think, to literature. It's important to read these stories.
Maybe literacy, slightly better said. Literacy, because that was really what mom did. Yeah, she helped certify reading specialists, so who then taught younger kids how to read, which then itself does loads for people who are now learning.
Right. But mom is the first one that introduced me to the idea that what you read in the past influences what you read now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so if you come to the story of Matthew with no previous Bible knowledge, you'll do good. You'll probably find out some cool things. You'll probably be inspired by the story. But the more you come to know the other stuff that happens in the Hebrew Bible, you're going to read Matthew with a whole bunch more of different background information informing it, that was what I really thought about. It's like, oh, everything you read in the past influences what you read now.
Yeah, and I quite like, there are times where scholars will talk about the Gospels and other texts with a little bit of wonder as to like how these fishermen and tax collectors could write these incredibly intricate texts, with all their allusions and references.
Yeah.
And I sympathize. I can see why that might come up. But I also wonder the extent to which part of the ways that these books were written was a consequence of the thought world that they lived in, that was itself steeped in their own stories, that maybe there were some of these things that indeed, while written with intent, with particular rhetorical intent, that maybe there is an extent that we just don't quite understand, that they could write these things just off the dome, kind of. So that there are tropes and allusions and rhetorical plays that probably we are not hearing. We cannot hear because there's just a little too much distance between us and them and the context that they were written in and to whom they were written.
Yeah.
Which then just makes it all the more fascinating because you are doing layers and layers and layers of kind of archaeology.
Yeah.
On how the text has been used, how it might have been written, when it was written, to whom it was written, why it was written, and then how that text has been received by different groups, different church groups in one century versus the next century versus the century after that, which means there's this incredible sort of snowball effect of all sorts of commentary from different centuries.
So I just quickly looked through the opening chapters of Matthew, right? So do you have a Bible there with you too?
Yeah, just here.
I'm not sure if we need to read through like the entirety of it all, right? But at least I want to pay attention to the subtitles that happen in mine, and let's maybe contrast them. What do you have in front of you?
The genealogy, the birth of Jesus the Messiah, the visit of the wise men, the escape to Egypt, massacre of the infants, return from Egypt. That's up to chapter 3.
Are you using the same Greek English?
No, just my very beaten up Catholic edition RSV.
Because it had the exact same subtitles as mine did.
Yeah, but I have the bonus books, extra books.
Okay.
Right.
But one of the things that always stood out to me, and maybe we could talk about light and darkness, because Christmas is situated in the darkest season of the year. Daylight is the shortest in the northern hemisphere, right? Which is where Jesus was born. Yeah. But from my understanding, Jesus was probably born in the spring, not in December, right? and that some people have even given the challenge that Christianity was just subsuming the winter solstice, and how that was a winter celebration that was done by the pagans, and Christians observed it and absorbed it into itself. Anyways, I never really had a problem with that, because to me, what is it? The darkest day of the year is potentially the 21st, 22nd of December. And then 3 days later, light starts growing again, or light happens more. The tide has turned in the darkness. And what's roughly 3 days later than the 22nd of December? The 25th.
Okay. Right. So this being a sort of resurrection motif. That's what we're driving at.
Yeah, I think that that celebrating Christmas on December 25th is uniquely situated 3 days after the winter solstice. The darkest day, 3 days later, has light growing again, or whatever. And this kind of goes back and forth with despair and light, or hope. Despair is often seen as an incredibly dark season, right? But then hope happens because light starts shining again. It starts, I keep saying the word growing, because our daylight is getting longer in the northern hemisphere. So I thought it's also interesting how in John's gospel it talks about Jesus was the light of the world.
Yeah.
And here's the light of the world being born at the darkest time of the year. Or at least we celebrate light being born at the darkest time of the year. Yeah.
Which is one of the things I really like about, and I try to keep an eye for it when I see nativity paintings, especially some of the sort of hyper realistic ones, is that they often, again, do as much diligence as they can to be very realistic, except sometimes if you pay attention to where the light is, the lighting of the painting itself, light is going out from the infant in the manger, which is just a really interesting sort of sign that gets painted in. Really interesting, again, sort of visual rhetoric that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So we need to shift in just a moment. We have like 5 more minutes, and then we should, actually, no, we've got a little bit more time than that, but I think we should also pay attention to what comments have been made so far and maybe reply.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's some people who have.
So there might be people who made comments so far on YouTube. There might be some others that have done it on Facebook. And I'm also going to check and see if anybody has texted me about this.
Oh, right. Okay.
So we've got a few ways. And of course, we'll always be open to it anymore.
Yeah, sounds good.
But real quick, Steve, do you have a nativity there?
I do
Christmas
not.
decorations?
No, I don't have anything. I was going to ask, though, because I think I see Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Is there Spider-Man in your nativity?
Yeah. Well, it's like a stealth Spider-Man.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
Is there Boba Fett in your nativity? Because I'm pretty sure that's Boba Fett. Is that my Boba Fett? Wait.
What do you mean your Boba Fett? This is mine. Why wouldn't Boba Fett celebrate Christmas?
I can think of a couple of reasons. Wrong universe for starters. Fictional for second starters.
Well, we also have St. Francis. I thought he should be there.
Okay.
He likes animals, so of course he should be there in the barn as well. Yeah.
Barn.
Then you should recognize this guy. I also have George.
That's because I got him for you. Yeah.
But don't you have one as well?
I don't think so. No.
I think we have matching ones. Torg and Grot.
I have no idea.
Because I think we bought 2 and we gave them on Christmas.
I definitely gave you one because I got it when I was going through the airport in Norway.
Okay, I might be misremembering.
I don't remember. Anyway, yeah.
Actually, I believe you.
Classic John, misremembering. Remember, guys, smartest and funniest.
But on my side, I thought we bought 2 of these and we each had one.
I don't recall.
Okay.
Anyway,
Anyways.
yeah.
So do you have any other thoughts you want to get in about hope or despair during Advent?
Yeah, one, but it's my sort of standard trope, and I sort of already winged off of it. That I can't help but think, because I've read a fair bit of the Green Lantern comics, hope almost always ties in with the Blue Lanterns, because Green Lanterns use willpower, which isn't technically an emotion, I don't think.
Well, I think you need to go more basic than that. Who is even the Green Lanterns? Some people may not even know that.
Right. So in the DC comics, the Green Lanterns are intergalactic policemen, kind of, who use rings that are tiny supercomputers that allow them to project hard light holograms using their willpower.
Keep talking. I'll go get it.
Okay. And whereas in one of the later sort of quite large stories that occur, story arcs, they introduce Blue Lanterns and eventually Red Lanterns and Orange Lanterns and a whole slew of other ones. But the Blue Lanterns are specifically made so that they sort of run off of hope, which I found quite compelling. But one of the things I sort of grew a bit dissatisfied with in some of the comics is that their hope was always this sort of vague, very undifferentiated kind of hope that seemed like a kind
grounded? Of. What do you mean?
Well, like a.
By the way, this is what the Green Lantern looks like. You might recognize him, some people.
Yeah. I gave you that for Christmas a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he's going to join the Nativity now.
Oh gosh, right. Yeah, but I as I read more of the comics, I always found it a bit strange that part of the hope they seemed to run off of was a kind of more nebulous sort. It seemed closer to optimism, a sort of attitude towards things being well, but wasn't necessarily, never quite knew the way forward. Never had a directed sort of point or area in mind. And the part of me that does sort of thinks Christian theology thoughts wonders if that's quite what's going on when we hear about like faith, hope, and love in the Bible.
Right.
Yeah, because again, so much of how certainly the New Testament is written and reflects on itself is so thoroughly bound up and wound around the stories of the resurrection that it is really, really coremost in a way that, you could remove quite a lot of other things, I think. But the resurrection is one you really could not get rid of, and is one of the sort of perpetual and genuine mysteries that I don't think, it's a mystery in that, we can do all sorts of textual analysis and all sorts of historical analysis about who we think wrote it, why they wrote it, what the experience of the authors were, or the experience of the people for whom the authors are writing, because we know in some instances, people who wrote particular gospels were writing down on behalf of people who maybe couldn't write. Right. So I always find that compelling and interesting, how deeply rooted that sits in. Yeah, there we go. So we have both had a professor at Eastern University who used to say, all specifically about the Gospel of John, but I think applicable about any of the other Gospels and indeed the rest of the Bible, that they are books in which babes can toddle and elephants can snorkel, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, compelling and really wonderful kind of metaphor to use.
Right, inferring that you could go ankle deep in some of these stories, or you could be like an elephant and go way deep.
Yeah. And that there is something to be said about reading and rereading in a way that I read Matthew differently than I read it 5 years ago. I read it differently than I read it 10 years ago.
Right.
And which makes me understand all the more so why we hear stories of older theologians from past centuries, these old dead, not actually white men and women who could be reading these books again and again and again and again and kept finding things in them.
Yes.
Quite compelling things.
Right. So, Steve, I was having a conversation with Mom about like a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2 years ago.
Okay.
I think. Anyways, But the question that I had for her, I was reading through the book of Exodus, right? Which
right, as you do.
This the story of Matthew references things that happened in the book of Exodus, right?
Right.
So we already talked about there's an attempt to kill all the Israelite babies in Bethlehem, just like in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the flight into Egypt, into the wilderness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's something to be said that in literacy and in literature, there's questions about, and we're going to go a little deep here. There's questions about where the meaning of a text lies.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But there's a list of them. Okay. So, like, does the original meaning of the story of Christmas in Matthew,
right,
does the meaning of the text exist in the author's mind, in the text,
mm-hmm.
in the original audience,
mm-hmm.
in our current audience of
mm-hmm.
our community? Is it just within us individually, or is it in the mind of God?
Right.
And so there's this idea that, like, listen, it's not necessarily that the story of Christmas in Matthew has a meaning, in as much as it is a massively meaningful event from many different ways.
Yeah.
And so you've probably done the same thing as me. Like, you come into an area or a group of people that are maybe used to one type of answer.
Mm.
But then I think you and I both have gotten a little addicted to being like, well, but the original audience could have read it like this, but my church community reads it like this, but yours reads it like that. And even you said it right there earlier. It's like, I could read this story now, but the meaning I draw from it now will be different from the meaning I drew from it 10 years ago when I was a different person.
Yeah.
And that's totally good, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to be careful about eliminating any through line. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's, and I mean, this is one of the like perennial tensions between somebody who wants to try and find the meaning in one place versus sort of recognition that meaning is a little more flexible in that respect. And I can totally see how for some people, if you're in one camp, the other camp might seem really terrifying to you, right? If you're used to there being or thinking that there can only be one particular way of meaning, so you have to be very, very careful in how you interpret not just the Bible, but any text. I can see how somebody who might just as happily say, yeah, but there's multiple meanings and multiple ways to read depending on who you are, when you're reading, why you're reading, yada, yada, yada. I can see how that can become something like a death of a thousand cuts. All the same, I can see how somebody sitting in the sort of multiple meaning camp might sort of be genuinely put off by somebody going, no, this is it. Because it seems to stamp out any further conversation. Because you've sort of drawn your line in the sand and you either go with me or you don't at all.
So as you're talking there too, I kind of came up, what was brought to my mind is the Christmas story in Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
Most people want to read it in a way that makes it very glorious and regal. But actually, it was a very humble start for a king. And so Matthew kind of does the inversion of, like, you guys are maybe used to a king that was born in a palace surrounded by servants, not shepherds. You might have been expecting a king that was going to be blessed by the priests, not by the astrologers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have is, here's a God that was born man, and instead of surrounded by royalty, is surrounded by donkeys, which were originally the animal of service.
Yeah, and as our good buddy Chica Chesterton has written about, he drew that neat, compelling line in The Everlasting Man about sort of humanity being born in a cave when it because
Yeah.
he was writing around about the time that the cave paintings were discovered in France. So he's making this argument that like humanity was born with art, um, or the advent of art. Uh, so he then makes a through line to say that like humanity is reborn in a cave again, the cave being this lower part of the house, this lower part of the inn, the barn, the manger, whatever translations we use today, which boil down to the place downstairs, like the garage of the house, where instead of the car you kept all the animals.
Right. So then, what would you say are the ways that you experience hope and despair in the midst of the Christmas story? You
Um,
look worried.
yeah, well, we should always be. Maybe I don't want to say that out loud. You should always be a little worried reading the Bible. Sorry.
It's a dangerous book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think again because these Gospels were written with the end in mind, with the rest of Jesus' life in mind, you will always see glimmers at the very
Oh,
start of where it's headed.
wait, so you mean it's always foreshadowing?
Yeah. Yeah. These were always written way after the fact. So there was a lot of reflection that the authors have had on them that change how they write it in ways that, like, for example, I did a bit of a reading earlier tonight out of Luke's gospel that ends with that really sort of poignant line where Mary takes all these things and treasures them in her heart.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
So there's this thought even there that like there are glimmers that Mary knows something's happening beyond all the initial good news and hope that's born, even a sort of very grounded hope of a newborn boy before we even get to sort of cosmic salvific hope, whatever we mean when we say that, because again that is also a very different open question. um, so yeah, I think there's a kind of beautiful admixture of the two that occur, which to me rings incredibly true with how life itself is. It's rarely just a complete wash of one or the other.
Yeah.
I actually get quite nervous when folk want to put up what to me seem like kinds of false dichotomies between two, or notions that like these two poles are mutually exclusive from each other, when
Oh,
it
okay.
seems like they have more truck with each other. There's a little more back and forth with it. Is one of the things I dearly appreciate coming out of like my time at Villanova, which was a Catholic institution. That there is something about that. There is something that I can see for people who are not Catholic can seem a little morbid, sort of recognition slash emphasis on
Well,
the nature of suffering in the world. Like I can see how that can be.
I think it was you, Steve. Didn't you point out to me once that Renaissance art
Oh,
of the nativity scene, often in the corner or off to the side, would often have a skull hidden but visible or a
mm.
crow? And that was always like the symbol of like looming death. Like death was just always there.
Or sometimes a full blown crucifix. Yeah, like
Really?
sometimes. Oh yeah, there are some that will. Yeah, you'll see maybe not necessarily a full crucifix, but like you'll see cross shapes, right?
Yeah.
Either in like the lowercase t or the X form. Like yeah, there are ways where that's getting worked in. Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Mm, yeah.
Also, like maybe in the architecture of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah. Like
barn,
it
there's
means
like
them.
a cross hidden. That's
Yeah.
pretty wild. I didn't know that part. That's kind of cool.
Mm. How about you? Hope, despair.
Um, I've always been struck with the idea that we're never fully one or the other.
Yeah.
That we're always, our internal worlds are always a mix of hope or despair, love or apathy, war or peace, like all of these things. And it's really hard or maybe we can set ourselves up for certain levels of like disappointment when we expect ourselves to be always completely hopeful. And yet, what do I do with this darkness over here that I experience in life? It's like, actually, the real saints are the ones that hold both of them together, because that's a part of the package of what it means to be human. But it's almost like those are the two mountains that we always have to live between, hope and despair. But maybe the earth tilts towards hope at all times. Maybe the cosmos always is twirling towards hope rather than despair.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think you get that on a Christian read. Yeah.
You what?
I certainly think you get that on a Christian read, especially if we want to mention our good friend whose name begins with a T, Teilhard de Chardin. But
I thought you were going to talk about Tom Torrance.
Yeah. Well, we're running quite late on time, I think. Yeah.
Well, we have 10 more minutes. What I have, let's do a quick plug, because there is a really good book that you told me about and I read it, called Space, Time, and Incarnation by Torrance, which is about how God comes into space and time, and what does that mean for the incarnation, the embodiment of God into space and time. That's pretty wild. So you should all go look that up on Amazon. That's all. We don't need to talk about it at full length right now.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But what do you think? What did Deschardins say? What's the
just Teilhard, especially, in some ways. And again, I should reread him. It's been a little while. But he was always interested in how sort of universe is getting kind of, in his language, pulled towards a particular point. That God is sort of pulling things in a hopeful direction towards a consummation. Yeah. Which there's an incredibly hopeful read to that.
Right. And to me, it's almost like, because I've read a good bit of Teilhard, and he talks about how, like you said, there's a gravity that's pulling all things towards hope or towards love, right? But then that becomes the question of whether or not we are living our lives in the direction that helps towards hope or moves towards love, rather than living lives in such a way that like work against the gravity of God in the opposite direction. Yeah. It's almost like hope and despair are, I don't know, we live in the end that we're living towards. Our lives reflect what we're working towards. Kind of like how you just said that at the incarnation in the Christmas story, there's looming death in the background pictures of the Renaissance. I think it's probably theologically accurate that we're already living out the end.
Yeah, I think in some respects, I think there's fair enough, and we probably could unpack that a bit more. But I'm not sure how we could unpack that in the time we have. Well, I think that certainly would be something to sort of muse on for the next couple of days, because we have next Sunday as well, where we're going to chat a little bit. And what was the next one? Next week we did hope. We're going to talk hope this week.
Next week is peace.
Peace and Mark.
We could do that. Yeah. Peace and more. Yeah.
Mark. Yes. Yeah. No, I expect. Yeah.
What are some of the favorite? Oh, let's do one more plug. If you have any comments or questions, you should do them now on YouTube or on Facebook, because we've got a few from a few people. But if you want to get any last comments, you should do that now.
And we can try and do something. I mean, we can read through some of them and have a think about it for next week as well.
Well, yeah, we can maybe do a few.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the really important thoughts? I understand that you made some notes for tonight, but what are some of what's a golden nugget that you would really like to communicate?
I think still, especially if we're working with hope out of the Gospel of Matthew, I think there is, I'm consistently struck, and I keep finding it in different places at different depths, throughout the books of the New Testament, certainly, and certainly the Hebrew Bible. What am I talking about? Where hope is a structural feature in a way that nonetheless acknowledges that things can be awful. Right? There is something incredible about hope in the face of the exile. Something incredible about the hope that keeps reoccurring throughout the prophetic books. All the different prophets who are railing against the Israelites for having done wrong, but nonetheless have a deeply grounded hope. You would argue in the person of God, in the idea that God will remain true to God's promises, even if the Israelites didn't or don't. Yeah.
I think I like the idea that I don't want to say that hope is a choice, but it certainly feels as though hope is something that you have to cultivate, like in a garden. You almost have to be mindful of it or tend to it. And we have the tendency, apparently in neuroscience, to be 7 times more predisposed towards negativity. And so it makes me think that we should maybe be 7 times more intentional about living into hope.
That certainly seems to track with some of the current stuff I'm hearing and listening to in my context, to do with like resilience as a skill.
Yeah.
Like it's not necessarily the sort of like talent, but there is something to it that takes effort and work, which is especially important in the kinds of circumstances we find ourselves in now, either outside of Philadelphia or in Edinburgh, just because of all the things that are currently going on.
So let me read some comments.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
From the Hearsts, they say, "Hey, Chaffee dudes, what you up to?"
Right.
We're up to this. That's what we're doing.
Filling up my tea.
Yeah, Steve's drinking tea in his ugly sweater. Well, now I'll also say that you are sipping jealousy on my nativity scene. That's more inclusive than any nativity scene you've ever seen. Mike DeBenedetto says, "Sup, bro, dudes." What's up, Devo? It's been a while, man. Oh, I don't know who this is. Drinker of Fine Teas commented, "Love the Christmas jumper." That must be someone you know, Steve.
Could be. Yeah.
You show that off again?
That's just it's the same one I've had for ages. Find your oh, that's oddly fitting. Find your lack of cheer disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good. A guy I know, Joseph Choi, says, "Interesting. Where does the meaning live?" I would say that the meaning lives wherever the spirit is challenging you the most, at least in this moment.
I'll have to think on that.
Well, I mean, I'm a fan that the Holy Spirit can speak to you in different ways at different times through the same text.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
But usually, Spirit is always inviting us to greater health, wholeness, holiness. And so if you're reading the Bible in such a way that it's encouraging you, your interpretation is encouraging you move away from health, holiness, or wholeness, then it's probably not the Spirit of God actually in it.
Open your mouth and Gus came out.
That'd be a burp. Yeah.
No, Gus, our buddy Gus from the 3rd century.
Augustine?
Yeah, come on, man. You don't have nicknames for these guys?
Our buddy Gus?
Yeah.
I've never heard you reference Augustine as Gus.
Yeah. No, that's one of the ways I try and talk about him when sort of getting near confessions, because it's an easy way to try and distinguish between like Gus, the character he presents himself as, the younger version, as opposed to Augustine, the bishop and esteemed rhetorician who's writing his autobiography for a very particular reason.
Remember back in the day, in like previous youth groups, I would reference different key figures by nicknames. So like Augustine was Augie, Thomas Aquinas was Tommy. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was D. Bon. That was a good one. But then Joseph also said, the earth tilts towards hope. Apparently he liked the poeticism of that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to start wrapping up. It's all
Yes.
good. Let me look at Facebook, see if anybody wrote something there.
Okay. And then we said next week. All right. So next week is peace.
Yeah.
Plenty
I
there.
don't see anything else for right now. That's all right. So some people, we're going to email out this link to our respective crews, and maybe people will make more comments on that. So here's what we'll do. Next time, we'll meet 5:30 on Sunday again. If there's new comments, we can address those at the start of the next one, right? But otherwise, I think there's a chance we might start having some visitors join us.
Oh dear. Okay.
Just some good people that have also been in church work who are
Excellent. Sounds good.
Wait, what?
Sounds good. Yeah. More people to sort of riff with.
Yeah. So it'll be good. And then we'll see if we can come up with something interesting for the very last one, the last Sunday before Christmas. So it'll be fun.
Great. I look forward to your ugly Christmas jumper next week.
I mean, I could have put on the red union suit, the old cowboy underwear that's like the full body with the butt flap. But I opted against wearing the butt flap onesie today.
You don't need to say it. I think we all understand that a union suit probably has that, right?
Not many people know that a union suit has a butt flap. And I think it's important to say the word butt flap as many times as we can before this video ends.
I knew you would do it. Right. Okay. Very good. This was lovely. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Good chance to just sort of riff, like I said.
Okay. Let me, we should come up with a back and forth somehow. Happy Advent. May hope.
Yeah. Happy Advent. What are we talking about? Happy Advent, man.
Happy Advent. May hope be with you.
Sounds good. Happy
And
Advent.
also with you. No?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Go for it. Say it.
Okay. Happy Advent. May hope be with you.
And also with you.